Right, this is the second Ask the Cabinet meeting that we do regularly now, the podcast that we do. I'm here with the Leader of the Council, Councillor Dennis Jones, and the Deputy Leader, Councillor Mohammed Jamil, and we've got a few questions that we've been asked by members of the public from Peterborough. But first of all, it was the budget yesterday announcement. What did you think of it, Dennis? Overall, were you happy? Were you surprised by anything?
One thing, obviously, there's always two sides to every argument, and we hear about this 22 billion black hole. The IMF have come out this morning and said it's a good budget. The OBR have made warning sounds about the future of it in terms of what it will do for employees further down the line. But as we sit here now, I think she's got the balance just about right. I think, for my personal thing, I'm a great believer, as the party has always said, that those with the broadest shoulders should bear the biggest burden. And perhaps in some ways, I wish we'd gone a little bit further on that, but time will tell. And I'm comfortable with it at the moment, John. Yes.
What do you think?
John, I think one of the ways you can always tell is how the markets react. Mm-hmm. And if you remember Liz Truss's that famous budget that they did, and then the reaction the next day and Absolutely. The day after, today it's calm. The markets are calm. So obviously they've accepted that this is not a bad budget. It's a good budget for ordinary working people.
Taxes raised by £40 billion. One of the headlines was on the press release, the Chancellor chooses a budget to rebuild Britain. Do you think that's fair? What as an overall title?
Yes. One of the things is one of my jobs, if you like, is on the combined authority is about growth and regeneration. We're going to return to that a little bit later on. This is a pro-growth government. We do need to look for growth and regeneration across the city and across the combined authority region. And this is one of the things that we need to do. So yes, I think that it is about raising taxes so that we can pay for the infrastructure that we desperately need.
I think people sometimes forget that services have to be paid for, and we inherited, as Dennis has said, a £22 billion hole. And Labour has always been accused in the past of not always being reckless with the finances, and I think this is a sensible budget where they've not gone over the top. As Dennis said, they could have taxed more, and those who can afford to pay more could have paid more. However, I think it was a reasonably well balanced budget, and I think going forward it will give us a good sound platform in order to for the next 4 years. And I think personally, I think it's a good start.
You mentioned businesses earlier on, and obviously national insurance contributions are going up. That's going to hit businesses.
I think it will, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend it won't. But those with as Dennis said, those with the broad shoulders should be able to pay a bit more. It's not a lot more, and I also realise that this may stop some employers passing on bigger pay rises. However, I think in the largest scale of things, I think most of the smaller, medium-sized businesses, I don't think it will have that big an impact on them.
Okay. And there is an increase of more than 22 billion for health to bring down NHS waiting lists, and that's something that really needs to happen, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Do you think it served local councils well, the budget?
We have a consultancy called Pixel, and I was talking with our Chief Finance Officer last night, and generally speaking, they're quite encouraged by we're looking at now longer term reviews and settlements for local government. The keynote speech that Angela Rayner made at the LGA conference last week was very encouraging, and our CEO was pleasantly surprised by it. And without going through it in detail, they're recognising. I was on a call with Jim McMahon last night. All the Labour leaders were, not just me. And we are recognising as a party the role of local government. and the portents are good. It's not going to happen overnight. You can't fix everything overnight, but I'm greatly encouraged by what I've heard and seen so far.
And winter fuel payments. I mean, that must have been, you must both have been.
A little bit.
Yeah, people must have spoken to you about that. I mean, there were a lot of people who are worried, elderly people who are worried about heating their home, full stop, this winter. What would you say to them? What would you say?
Well, I think there's been rises in pensions, and what it is the ability for people to claim pension credit, which I think is one of those benefits where people don't bother. And I think whilst I sympathise with those who will not get it, I also understand that we have to make sure that our books balance at the end of the year as a government in order to start pushing further and developing and making people wealthier as we go on into the future. Sadly, the winter fuel payments is one of those payments that's taken a hit this time, but there's been rises in pension
I'm retaining
payments,
the triple lock.
and we've retained the triple lock. And if you think the previous government, whilst they may say what we've done is wrong, for 3 years they actually took it off. So it's for us, it could have been done better, but we feel that this is a good start. And then further on, depending on the state of the finances, it may be returned, it may not be returned. But I think unfortunately, with the pleasure comes the pain, and I think it's a bit. I'd like to think it's a bit short game, short pain before we get the pleasure of have to we seeing those rises come back.
I mean, I do have a great deal of sympathy with pensioners. I'm one of them. I've lost mine.
But yeah. Okay.
So, no, but I mean, there are ways of handling it. It hasn't been well received, but at full council, you may recall I was asked to write to Rachel Reeves. I think that we put together, with help from other parties, a good letter. It represents how people feel, and we've put that out there. So we do recognise that yes, there is pain, as Jamil said, but what we are doing, what I'm comfortable with as a council, is making sure that everybody was entitled to pension credit, and therefore the winter fuel allowance is actually encouraged to get it, and that's what I'm hoping will for the people who really need it, and the people who really get it, and we're pulling out all the stops to make sure that happens.
So locally, it's not just us, the combined authority.
Absolutely.
I was at their board
Yes.
meeting a couple of weeks ago. So they're going out of their way to make sure those who are able to correct. So hopefully the damage will be limited, but we understand that there will be some people who will not be able to get the credit. But like I say, it's something for that we can then build on and then maybe look to bring back later on. But
Absolutely.
we'll see how it goes. But it's after 14 years, first we lived through austerity and then all the other problems that we've had. It's some things have to give, and unfortunately, this was one of those.
1 in 25% of pensioners are millionaires. And that's the other thing we've got to bear in mind. There are lots of statistics around it, but it doesn't take away. There are a lot of people who are just a few pounds over. And one of the things in the budget is making sure we start to taper things and deal with things a little more, perhaps sensitively than that was done. You learn.
So let's talk about shaping your city. We've held several meetings around the city, the consultation meetings. How do you think they've gone from what you've heard? How do you think they've...
There's no question that the online interaction through Facebook and the online has gone far better than the face-to-face. I think one of the questions, are you frustrated? No, I'm not frustrated. I just see it as a learning opportunity. I deeply want to engage with more people, and we've just got to look at more creative and innovative ways that we can do that. But the engagement we've had, some of the questions have been incredible. You always get a couple of people with axes to grind, but generally speaking, most people who've been either engaged have been incredibly positive. I just like to do more, get more opinion and widen the net.
Yeah, but that's not your fault, is it? I mean, you can't last year it was lasso them in. I mean, you can't force people to speak to you, basically, can you? So and the online, you say Facebook has done very well. We've got a lot of responses to polls. and things like that. What do you think, Jimmy? Do you think there's much more that could have been done, or?
I think just like Dennis has said, certainly the ones I've seen, we didn't have that many people, but the line of questioning was excellent. And sometimes, you know, when you sit down with residents and they tell you what their problems are at grassroots levels, and if we'd had bigger groups, then maybe we would not have gotten into that kind of detail. It is disappointing, but it's a start. I mean, next year, at the end of this year, we'll sit down, review whether it's a good thing or not. But it was the first time we've done this. So I know that going forward, when people say, oh, when, or they're having a moan or something, I'd say, well, actually, we did a roadshow or workshops and you didn't turn up, but next year. So I think it will probably build. I'm not in favor of scrapping it totally, but I just think that we need to sit down and have a good balance. Last year we had the online the online budget and people were able to comment. I think maybe next year we do all three. So people, it looks like horses because horses. Some people like going to public meetings. Some people like to sit behind a keyboard and do it. But I think lessons will be learned and moving forward. And when we review it, we'll see what worked well, what didn't. And also, you're limited as to how many meetings you can have because it's such a short period, and it takes up a lot of officer time, bookings, and in autumn when it's dark outside, maybe we look at the times and maybe we do Saturday daytime or something to allow different cohort of people to come. So I think we'll look at it, we'll review it, and then hopefully next year we'll have a better version of what we've done.
I mean, my only appeal to people is, lest we forget, only about 30% of the population, and certainly in Peterborough, actually vote. So if there's one thing that I would like this to do is engage with us, vote, and then when you see the effects, help us to continue to shape the city. That would help all of us enormously.
I would just, from a personal standpoint, the one I went to in Stanground, there were 3 young lads there who were very engaged, very interesting conversation, very clued up, went there, wanted some answers to, what's the, how we're going to get more houses into Peterborough and how are we going to deal with the street scene in Peterborough, cleaning it and things like that. I came up with some really good discussion points. So I guess what you would say is quality as well as quantity is important, isn't it? So so what happens now? Now obviously all these polls have been held. We've got the sort of documentation of what people said in these discussions. What happens now?
Okay, we collate everything that's been said online and at the face-to-face meetings, and that comes to cabinet, I think, by the end of this year. So obviously we can then take a more holistic view of what was taken. Were there any big differences in the online and the stuff that was done in the face-to-face meetings? And then we can consider it, because don't forget, we've got to have a balanced budget. And the whole point of this, if we remember, is about, we have about £220 million to spend, and I talk a lot now about the demand side and the supply side. As politicians, we're on the supply side, but we're also on the demand side because we live in Peterborough. We pay our council tax. We want to see whether children's services or whatever, and that's where I would like everybody to say, this is how we'd like to see our money spent. We have statutory services. There are things on which we have no choice. We have to spend that money. But the more discretionary spend, one of the things with the budget simulator last year is, you want a little more there, a little less there. So what we're trying to do is get people, even if they haven't engaged, to think about it. I'm not saying they have any sympathy for us, but at least they can know that we have to wrestle with these things on a day-to-day basis, because we've got to have a balanced budget by law by the 11th of March.
So we spoke about the online, the number of people who responded to us online. Got a lot of comments about a lot of the things we did. I'm going to pick up on a few of those because they're good discussion points. One of Peterborough Wombles, Steve Eastman, left a message with us. One of the things he'd like is volunteers who take care of litter in their community be recognised by the council community with full support, tools and clothing. and rewarded with recognition and voucher payments. Other preventative measures he would like are bins placed in the right location based on evidence of need. Now, he says this is not the case at the moment in many places. We did get a response from the street care manager at PCC, which is Chris Jackson. He said, yeah, there are some that could be better positioned, some have a historical context on the positioning. Most of those are only emptied weekly, so there would be no great saving in terms of removing them, etc. And the worst areas and culprits for underused bins are some of the villages, because there are a lot of bins considering their size.
Yeah.
But if you took them away,
Yeah.
they would not be very happy about it. Yeah. So I guess it is that balance, isn't it, with those sort of things? I mean, is there anything you'd like to say about?
Absolutely. One of the things I mentioned it before about my growth and regen role. So infrastructure is a big thing for us locally, regionally, and nationally. But also, I contacted Harry Machin, who Steve knows very well, about our social infrastructure. And as a consequence of that, I invited a guy called Mark Fishpool, who's done an awful lot of work around. He's well known in the area for the work that he's done. And indeed, we got Mark a civic award last year in recognition of the work that he's done. And there is a litter away day on the 26th of November. Mm-hmm. You know, people like Charlotte Palmer, as the officer in charge of that, has an incredibly full inbox. This is an area I'm utterly passionate about. I've had bins moved in my wards. I've paid for them out of my community leadership fund. And I've even been out, and I hope once my hip's better, to go back out on the bins again, because it's the one area, bin collections, what we put in and what we take away, that affects every single one of us in every week. And you know, this is an area that I would love to see more people engaged. I am working towards that, and I think if you speak to Harry, he'd recognise that. But you know, as the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day. But people like Steve and the Wombles, you know, we engage in local litter picks. One of the things we must do is I'd like to see more people in joining us, and also, and I say us because I do go out on litter picks and engage in and getting the recognition. I think Steve's absolutely right. And if we can provide them with protective clothing, we've got to be very careful, and this is when we start doing. We've got a lot of very fast roads in the area, and we must be very careful there. And I admire Mark for his enthusiasm in what he does, but we've got to keep people safe.
On the parkways and things like that, the central reservation and stuff.
You cannot compromise on that. You know, one fatality would just be one far too many.
Another thing he said, education in multiple languages at schools, local businesses and homes by means of public and social media platforms. I mean, I guess that will be down to the comms team in the end as well. But is that something? Is that fair? Do you think?
I think it's fair, but I think also we also need to educate landlords to be more responsible with when somebody does come in, doesn't speak the language. One of the things when you're signing your tenancy, whether it's the landlord himself or the letting agencies, black bins are for this, green bins are for this, brown. I think a lot of the problems that are caused are because this lack of understanding. And then, like you say, comms team can do this. We've got people who speak different languages, and if something goes out, we've got established communities, whether you're from Lithuania, Poland, whatever. So it's something that we can work on, and I'm sure the council have done similar stuff as well. But I just think that with regards to some of the actual problems that we have, and I just think a bit more responsibility from landlords would be a good thing.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on the away day, as you said, the 26th of November. A litter workshop with local volunteer groups, organisations and the council with the aim of improving everyone's collective understanding of the issues and identify how the various organisations, including volunteers, could collaborate and work better together. Because you're always going to get the criticism, I guess. Why should volunteers have to do it? The thing is, ultimately, I guess, it's the people who litter. They're the ones, it's the education about it. And the council's only got finite resources for dealing with that, isn't it?
I think there's two things as well, and if you look at our working lives, there's two reasons why we do things. The two big drivers. One is reward. We work for our wages. We work, and the other thing is recognition. Yeah, and one of the things is that society needs to recognise those people. There are people who are just going to litter, and we need to isolate and marginalise and bring these people to book. But in the meantime, there are an awful lot of people who are cleaning up after them, and these people need to be recognised. That we can't reward, we can't have thousands of people, sadly, on the books, but we do have, in Aragon, we have a great workforce that do go out and do that. And even though they're rewarded for doing it, they should get the recognition they deserved, because that is a tough job, often in difficult circumstances. Can I just come back? And I don't know whether, going on from Jamil's point, at the start of COVID, somebody, I can't remember, I think it was on social media, they said, you know what, you've got a lot of young people, they don't really speak English, they don't watch the BBC, they won't really understand what COVID is. Why aren't we putting signs on the street in different languages about social distancing and what it means? It took us months and months and months, not just here, but in other places. Guess what we ended up doing? So sometimes you can have a very good idea that comes in from a member of the public, and that's exactly what we started to do. But it took us quite a while to do it, because they're not watching UK TV. They're probably not even watching TV in their own countries. They're probably watching YouTube. They're probably watching videos. So we have to find other ways to engage with people, and that is a never-ending task. And like I say, this is where we need our comms team to think creatively with us. So it's down to you, JB.
Oh, okay. Thanks, both. But you're right. You're right. Whether it will, I mean, I saw somebody. Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest. I pulled up yesterday on New Road, near where the old market used to be. There was an old chap with a trolley, and he's opened it up and was just chucking stuff on the side of the road. And honestly, I just parked up on the double yellow lines. Oh, sorry, everyone. Put my hazard lights on, and I was ready to go out and say something. But I just thought, what's the point? In the end, it happens, and you get yourself into a confrontation about it.
It's funny you say that. Whilst during the last election campaign, me and my colleagues were out, and we had a lady, and she was sweeping her front garden. So I watched her sweep, and she got to the front gate, and I was thinking she's going to pick this up. She then swept it all onto the road.
Not on my
I went and I said to her, I said, look, you put it all together. Why couldn't you just get a dustpan and brush it? She goes, well, what do I pay my council tax for? And I was saying, well, if you'd just done it, it would have made no difference. But it's changing the minds. And asking, because I to the biggest roads that I've got, Cromwell Road, Gloucestershire, I sometimes wonder if you just clean the bit outside your house, we would have a much cleaner area. But it's education. It's making sure, and then getting them to buy into this, saying, look, if you have a cleaner area, will people respect it more? We probably have less fly tipping. So it's something that I've spoken. It's something that I've spoken to some of my colleagues, and I'm going to revisit that to see, maybe if we can get, even if we get half the people to do it, it's a plus.
And I'm constantly reminded. Not many, but I don't know, but there is a video of me on YouTube actually filming fly tippers, following them around, because they two young guys. I can't remember. It's somewhere, but people do remind me that I'm following two young guys around, and they were saying be friendly, but somebody was paying them to take black bags and dump them. Actually, not in my ward, close to where I lived. And when I went out and talking to them, didn't make a difference. Filming them made a huge difference. But do it safely. Don't that's to be advised. That's right. Just pick your moment.
Okay, well, we stopped that. Just one last thing on that. I guess we do have information on our website as to correct documentation. So if somebody does turn up at your door and say, I can get rid of this, 20 quid cash in hand, no chance. They just don't do it.
Absolutely.
But this is my problem, in that I tell people 23 quid and the council will take some of this stuff away. And the way to do it. And I just don't think sometimes that we use or we sell that service enough. And maybe it's a comms team thing again. But for five bulky, don't dump your fridge there or
Yeah.
someone. Or
Yeah.
it's only
Take it
23
away.
quid. I mean, it's not a big deal.
No.
And then they'll take it away along with other items that you may need to get rid of. And I just think that we maybe need to re-advertise that service, because I know that the recycling centre is used well. So those who can, but then the problem is those who don't know about it. If they know, then we can actually get something done.
Okay, so the next question. This was also on our Facebook pages, on the Shaping Our City pages. And I would encourage people to just to look at them, because there's a lot of comments on there that will obviously be taken on board later, as we said earlier. So this is Wayne Laconic, who is a regular commenter on our pages, and makes a lot of interesting points about things. I've just taken this one. It's quite a long post. He's spoken about voting and elections.
Yep.
He says in this comment, and I can't remember exactly what post it was referring to, but he said, a very sensible way in which to reduce PCC's overall costs, and which the previous Conservative administration foolishly decided against implementing, is by establishing one election for all local councillors, rather than electing 1/3 of all councillors in 3 of the 4-year term. It's ridiculous, incredibly wasteful, and does nothing to encourage more local people to vote. So this has been spoken about before, relatively recently as well, obviously. What would you say about that, Jamil? Do you think that's a good idea? I mean, I have spoken to our elections team, so they've got some things to say as well.
I know that recently, with the improvement panel who've been, and they asked us to look at it, and as a council we looked at it, and at that time we said no, now is not a good time, but then we did assure them that we will revisit it again. Now I also have councillor friends who have this one every 4-year elections. Now, problem with those type of elections is that it doesn't mean that you're going to get anything more stable than what you've got at the moment. Whether you like it or not, Peterborough is very swing. And I know we've had a Conservative administration, but from about 2016 onwards, they've needed the help of others to get things through. So my answer to the question that's raised is that you may have that system, however, it may not get you the results that you think you're going to get, and that's not always the best thing. And I know that as someone who's a campaigner and has been campaigning for longer than I can imagine, I would say if you have an election every 4 years, and then trying to get people to stay interested is quite difficult until it's an election year. Yeah. We find that this way, every year we knock doors. People, one of the biggest bugbears is you only come at election time. Well, at least that's once a year. Yeah. Whereas if it's every 4 years, there's no guarantee that you'll actually see them, because once you're in, even though if you're a good councillor, you'll be going more often. So there are advantages, and I understand where Wayne is coming from, but I actually don't see how that would actually be more beneficial to our city.
I mean, one of the things that our elections team said was it would undoubtedly lead to more by-elections, because people after a year or whatever might decide, actually, I don't really want to be a councillor. You also, of course, have the potential. I mean, what would happen if you had 60 new councillors? You could have it, couldn't you? Or a large number of inexperienced.
I think the danger is first of all, from my personal perspective, I would support all-out elections.
Yep.
Okay. With the caveat that there's pros and cons with both. And I think there's an old saying. 60. If we just use ours and 60 councillors, 1/3 of the councillors get involved in the life of the council. We're the living embodiment of that. You take on extra responsibilities, either in chair roles, you spend time in the town hall, but elections are won on people's doorsteps, not in the town hall. Let's be clear about that. The second thing is 1/3 of the councillors that make good ward councillors of all political hues. They get out there, they do the casework, and they're representative of their communities. And let's be honest, there's 1/3 of the councillors that don't do very much at all. and that is human nature incarnate, not just here, whether you have four all outs every 4 years, as we call them, or thirds, as we have. So there are pros and cons with both. The argument would be, the counterpoint. I'm not saying it's right because, as I say, there are pros and cons. One is that the smaller parties always say we would struggle to get people to come back if they weren't successful in this election. Then would they wait 4 years to have another go? But equally, if they miss that bus, if there are more by-elections, would their chance come up? So there is almost a counterpoint to that argument. It would save money. It would save us about a third at least of what we've got at the moment. The the government are looking towards again saving money, and one of the things they would like us to do. But and I don't know if you're aware of this. At the LGA conference last week, we met with the Electoral Commission, and it's our turn now for our boundaries to be checked. It was 2015 the last time. So the likelihood is we'll have all out elections in 2028 anyway,
Okay.
but there won't be a drive from the Electoral Commission. It will be a local decision whether we stay in thirds or whether we move to all outs. And to do that, we need a 2/3 majority. So 45 councillors would have to say, yes, we'll go all out for all out elections. There are pros and cons with both. I personally would favour all out elections, but I can see the other side of the argument. The one thing I am conscious of, and again, it goes back to engagement, every single party is struggling to get people who want to stand to be a councillor. And at the moment, with the issues that we're going through, it does seem like a thankless task. And if I did nothing else, it'd be remiss of me not to thank everybody who has stood, does stand, is a councillor, and will stand for stepping forward and doing the bit for, local government and our place in that in terms of national government. So thank you.
I mean, when I spoke to the elections team, they did say that we held a public consultation on all that, and we only got a handful of responses to that, which is perhaps tells you the story. Wayne also mentioned that he thinks the number of councillors themselves should also be reduced by a third and serve for longer terms rather than 4. What would you?
Well, let me manage Wayne's expectations.
Okay.
In that the Electoral Commission
would be the
will no. What they say is that we have a disparity. We have wards with single councillors, dual councillors. The idea is when they look at the boundaries, they should essentially all wards should have 3 councillors. Now, whether you get down to whether you have 20 wards or whether you have 10 wards, whichever, but each ward that should then carry the optimum is around about 2,500 to 3,000 votes. And if you take my ward, for instance, Dogsthorpe, ours is 2,000. So each councillor looks after 2,400 people in Dogsthorpe. That's not the case in some of the other wards. And of course, be mindful that there's an awful lot of growth south of the river with Haddon and things like that. And and you've got some of the rural wards which may have 1, maybe 2 councillors. So that all needs coming up. 18% of our wards now are too large for the number of councillors.
Really?
Yes. Okay. So that's why they're coming in. It's our turn. Nothing sinister. It's just the fact that we're 10 years on with your boundary review, and as we should be.
Okay, that'll be interesting. And as before, you can see Wayne's comment on the.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair point, and it's a healthy debate to have, and I know Wayne, and and that's a fair question.
Okay. We're going to move on to one more question, and then I'll just have a quick chat with you about other things as well. I was taking some photos around ARU the other day, and got speaking to 2 students, Katie Simnett and Salia Ali, who were they're looking at homelessness for one of their pieces of work at the moment. So they asked for some data, which I've given to them, and also quite an open question at the end, which is an interesting one. which I thought I'd ask you both. What would you propose to the council to help homelessness, and what services would you provide if you had the funding or more funding?
Oh.
I know that's quite an open question. It's a very good question, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh.
So what do you think, Jimmy? What could we do with that? I mean,
The thing is that one of the problems is that not just us, but all local authorities, we're restricted with the amount of money that we have, and not just that. It's not just the money; it's the housing supply as well. If we could probably build pods and shelters and so on. However, much of the people that you see on the streets are people who actually sometimes don't want the help.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
they're the ones that are really the hard to reach ones. Those that want the help usually can find the Lighthouse Project, or or come to the council, and we're able to house them, whether it's in our pods, whether it's emergency accommodation, bed and breakfast, or whatever. So if we had that, if we were able to do it, we would build. I don't know. More housing would be the answer. More single persons housing, more family housing, because some of the bed and breakfasts are full up with families. And therefore, if everyone had the same, and we would build more council houses, and we would be able to house everyone who wants to be housed. But then, bearing in mind the challenge is to house those that don't want to be housed, so we'd put out more people on the streets to work with them, to say, look, this is not an ideal situation. Come with us. We'll help you with, finances in terms of benefits and so on and so on. So that if we had the money, those are the kinds of things that we would be doing.
I guess also there's a crossover with like NHS services for the addictions, the mental health issues that people may have as well, isn't there?
I think the other thing is, just to put a little bit of context around that, is most developers are tasked with providing 30% of everything they build. As I'm being very simplistic, just 30%. In Peterborough, it's about 17.5%. Now, it's unrealistic in a single bounce like the budget. We're not going to fix it overnight. But one of the things I'd like us to see is move the dial to 20, 22, maybe even 24, 25%. We're aiming towards 30 of truly affordable housing. There's always this thing. Is 20% below market rate affordable? And for the vast majority of people, no, it's not. Now, I've banged a drum. I'm an old school socialist, and I've banged my drum about looking at. I'm pleased that the right to buy has been dropped. So the amount that people can get in right to buy, so it makes it less attractive and gives local authorities, because we can now keep those right to buy receipts with a view to putting it into building housing stock. But the about building council houses isn't the panacea to all ills, sadly. So we need more. We need more help from central government to make it worth our while to do that. But if to answer that lovely question is that if people, as Jamil said, if they choose, if it's a lifestyle choice to rough sleep, then they shouldn't impinge on the lives of people who want to go about their everyday business. I'm sorry, I don't believe that people who have accommodation, who choose to beg, should be allowed to do so and impinge on people's lives. But that shouldn't be at the expense of people who really are homeless. And we have a fabulous rough sleeper team, Sarah Skase, people like Kelly Slack, who do an amazing job. And I think if anybody wants to join us, I think it's either next week or the week after, we have the annual audit, we have the annual count, and my wife Alison, who's cabinet member for communities, we have the rough, and I'll be out there from 10 o'clock till the wee small hours and doing that. And we will do all we can for the people who need our help. I don't think we should be offering help to people who wish to flout the law and simply beg. No. And that's a separate issue altogether.
It is. I will just say one thing. I went out with the Rough Slipper Outreach team at 3-4 o'clock in the morning 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I saw what you're talking about there with people who may not be eligible for help or just simply don't want it. They're asked You know, do you need anything? No, I'm fine. And they're in a tent somewhere in a churchyard in the middle of a forest.
Look at Nobby. We all remember Nobby.
Of course we do.
You know, he finished up in my ward.
My great, but a famous and dare I say iconic person for many years in Peterborough, but stayed the same for many years and was offered help, I'm sure, on lots of occasions. So people, you know, and there are people, I have heard of people who do have accommodation and yet still sleep on the floor, even in their rooms, because they're so entrenched in that way of thinking. So
it's an excellent question. It's a
is.
very good point. There is no easy, quick answer. The one thing, and again, to give comfort to the people of Peterborough, wherever I go, whichever local authority, there are the three big issues that we all face is temporary accommodation, adults and health. You know, you're talking about mental health and older people and, you know, people being in hospital, social care and children's services. And that is straight right across the country. So temporary accommodation, homelessness is right up there for everyone, not just us.
Okay. Well, thank you to Katie and Salia for the question. Okay, I think we're just about time to wrap it up. Is there anything else you'd like to mention just while we are here, or have we? It's a good old run. We've had half an hour of good questions.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, we shall leave it there then. The next Ask the Cabinet will be back in about a month's time. So, thanks very much for watching or listening.